The old marching tunes always did a number on me, even after all these years. Memorial Day in Oakhaven meant the parade, a slow procession down Elm Street, past the library, past the hardware store, and culminating at the wrought iron gates of the defunct Oakhaven Military Academy. I'd been coming for 20 years, ever since. Well, ever since. A ritual of remembrance, a quiet nod to the ghosts I carried. Usually they stayed quiet. This year, though, something felt different. Thinner, as the local high school band, bless their enthusiastic, slightly off-key hearts, blared out a Sousa march. I saw them. Not just the fuzzy, grief-etched memories, but them. Sergeant Miller, his jaw still set in that stubborn line, even with the phantom shrapnel wound blooming on his temple. PFC Davies, impossibly young, his freckles stark against a pallor that wasn't just memory. They flickered at the edge of the crowd, just out of sync with the bright May sunshine, marching. I blinked, my breath catching. PTSD, I told myself. The heat, the music. They march with a different rhythm, don't they? The voice was dry, raspy, like old paper. I turned. An old man, perched on the low stone wall that bordered the academy grounds. I'd seen him, before, year after year, a silent fixture. Thin, dressed in a slightly too large faded suit, his eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, but sharp. Today, for the first time, he was looking directly at me. Mr. Hemlock, I think someone had once called him. Just remembering, I managed, my voice hoarse. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Remembering is a kind of seeing for some of us. And some days, the seeing is clearer, thicker. He gestured vaguely towards the parade. They appreciate the attention, I think. Keeps them tethered. An odd turn of phrase, but then grief made people odd. I'd tried to dismiss it, turn back to the parade, but his gaze held a peculiar weight. Over the next hour, as the floats and local dignitaries trundled by, he'd interject with quiet, unsettling observations. When the mayor spoke of sacrifice, Hemlock murmured, "Sacrifice is a hungry thing. It leaves echoes that feed." When a group of current servicemen marched past, crisp and solemn, he whispered, "Fresh anchors. The old ones, sometimes they fray." His words weren't just reflections on loss. They were specific. He described a particular chill that accompanied such thicker moments of seeing. A faint scent of cordite and damp earth. Things I'd only just begun to register. Myself peripherally, alongside Miller and Davies. How could he know? His own eyes seemed to look past the living parade, focusing on spaces between people, on the air itself. They don't always know they're not current, he said, his voice dropping. Time gets tangled for them. For us too, if we listen. Too hard. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a comforting smile. His skin, I noticed then, had a waxy, almost translucent sheen, like an old photograph fading. A peculiar faint scent clung to him, not unpleasant, but inorganic. Like dust from a place unvisited by sun. A profound unease began to creep over me, colder than the phantom battlefield chill I sometimes felt. After the parade, I tried to shake off his words, but they'd taken root. That evening, the shadows in my living room seemed deeper. I heard faint, dragging footsteps on the floorboards. Above, though I lived alone, the scent of damp earth that Hemlock had mentioned wafted from my closed closet. The next day, seeking some normalcy, I went to the library. And there he was, Mr. Hemlock, in the local history section, poring over a faded map of the old academy. Grounds. The lines blur, you see, he said without looking up, as if he'd expected me. He tapped a long, bony finger on the map. Here. This was the old infirmary wing. A lot of, resonance there. They gather. Mr. Hemlock, I started. I'm not sure You saw them yesterday, didn't you? His pale eyes pinned me. Sergeant Miller, young Davies, perhaps even Captain Thorne, with his perpetually worried frown. My blood ran cold. I'd never spoken their names to anyone in Oakhaven. They carry their stories, he continued, his voice a low thrum, And those stories, they want to be heard. They latch onto those who can still perceive the frequency. You're receptive, Mr. Henderson. His oversharing was no longer eccentric. It was a litany of impossible knowledge. He spoke of the spaces between moments where the dead breathe, of memories that become entities, of the contagion of witness. Each phrase was a cold drop of water, and I was the stone, slowly being worn away. My reality began to fray. Miller and Davies were no longer fleeting apparitions at parades. I'd see them in the reflection of a shop window, their spectral forms superimposed over my own. I'd hear their muttered battlefield curses when the house was silent. The smell of antiseptic and blood, faint but undeniable, would ambush me at random moments. Hemlock's words were a key, unlocking horrors I hadn't known existed, or perhaps, horrors that hadn't existed for me until he named them. I started to dread seeing him, yet I also felt a morbid compulsion. He seemed to possess an awful secret grammar of the world. His physical presence was becoming more unsettling. His eyes sometimes seemed to hold a faint internal light, and the air around him felt thin and cold, charged with a static I could almost taste. The climax came not with a scream, but with a whisper. A week after the parade, I found myself drawn back to the academy grounds, now silent and deserted. Hemlock was there, standing by the main gates, looking in. "They're waiting," he said. His voice was different, fainter, yet more resonant, as if it came from further away, or from inside my own head. "Waiting for what?" I asked, my heart hammering. "For the roster to be called," he said. He turned slowly, and in the fading twilight his form seemed less solid. The edges of his old suit wavered, and for a horrifying instant I thought I could see the pattern of the iron gates through him. "The war isn't over, Mr. Henderson," he said, his pale eyes gleaming with that unnatural light. "It just changes its soldiers. Some of us are called to stand witness. Some are called to join the ranks." He gestured towards the shadowy grounds. "They know you now. I made sure of it. The telling is the marking, you see. You hear them. You see them. Soon you'll march with them." He smiled then, that thin, awful smile, and it was like watching a mask crack. Beneath it, there was nothing human, just a vast, cold emptiness that reflected the dying light. And as I watched, horrified, he began to fade, not disappearing, but desaturating, like an old photograph exposed to too much light, until he was just a shimmer, a distortion in the air, and then gone. But the chill remained, the scent of dust and decay, and the voices: Miller, Davies, Thorne. They are always with me now. The parade ground is everywhere. Hemlock is gone. But the horror he unveiled is my constant companion. He wasn't just a messenger. He was a recruiter, a ferryman. The world is no longer safe, no longer what it seemed. It's a thin veneer over a vast, echoing battlefield, and I've been conscripted. Sometimes, I catch myself looking at other, aging veterans, at people lingering too long near old memorials, and I see a flicker in their eyes, that same pale, knowing look Hemlock had. And I wonder if they, too, are listening to a different rhythm, waiting for their names to be called on a roster that never ends. I fear I'm becoming one of them, another quiet conduit, another herald of the deep, unending wrongness. The marking is complete. The contagion has taken hold. Story 2. The cabin by Miller's Lake was supposed to be an escape. Memorial Day weekend, a rare chance for me, Chloe, Liam, and Sarah to unplug. We'd heard the stories, of course, the local lore about the platoon of soldiers who'd drowned during a training exercise back in the 50s, a tragic footnote, something to lend a bit of melancholic atmosphere to the otherwise idyllic setting. We didn't linger on it. The first time I saw Mr. Caspian, he was mending a section of dilapidated dock near our rental. He was a gaunt, weathered man, with eyes the color of the lake on a stormy day, a deep, murky gray-green. His hands, gnarled and stained, moved with a slow, deliberate precision. "Settling in all right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting at the lake bottom. "Just arrived," Liam called back cheerfully. "Beautiful spot," Caspian nodded, not looking up. "She is. Holds a lot, this lake, more than most." A slight pause, especially this weekend. Anniversary of a sort. A bit odd, we thought, but chalked it up to local eccentricity. The initial encounters were like that. Brief, slightly off-kilter, but not overtly threatening. He'd be there, by the shoreline, silently watching the water, or humming a tuneless, vaguely familiar melody that seemed to drift across the surface. It was on our second day that his oversharing began to curdle. I was sitting on the porch, reading, when he materialized from the tree line. "The water's thin today," he said, his gaze fixed on the shimmering expanse. "Sometimes you can almost hear them if you listen right, the ones who didn't make it back to shore." "Hear who?" I asked, a prickle of unease starting. "The boys," he said, a faint, almost wistful smile touching his lips. "They get restless. They miss the drumbeat, the call to fall in." His eyes flicked to me, and there was a depth in them, a knowing that felt ancient and unsettling. He smelled faintly of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. Liam scoffed later when I told him. Creepy old coot trying to spook the city folk. But I couldn't shake it. That night, I dreamt of dark water, of hands reaching from below, of muffled shouts just beneath the surface. The information Caspian fed us, in his fragmented pronouncements, began to manifest. After he mentioned how the cold settles where "They went down," Sarah shrieked while swimming, claiming a patch of water had turned instantly, unnaturally frigid, even though the sun was blazing. Caspian, mending a fishing net nearby, just nodded slowly. "They remember the chill," he'd murmured, loud enough for me to hear. He spoke of whispers on the surface when the wind is still. And later that evening, as we sat by the fire pit, a dead calm fell over the lake, and we heard them, faint, sibilant murmurs, like many voices speaking at once, too indistinct to understand, but undeniably there, seeming to emanate from the center of the lake. Liam tried to rationalize it as wind in the reeds, but his voice lacked conviction. Caspian's physical appearance seemed to subtly shift with each encounter. His skin grew more pallid, almost translucent, like something found at the bottom of a deep, dark well. His eyes seemed to reflect the lake's surface, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, always with that unnerving depth. He'd appear silently, always when one of us was alone, or when the conversation had turned to the growing strangeness. "They don't mean harm, not really," he said to me once, as I nervously skipped stones. "They're just caught, and they draw things in, warmth, company." He looked at me then, a long, searching look. Some folks are more resonant. They hear the call clearer. The unease was morphing into a gnawing dread. It wasn't just the lake anymore. It was Caspian. His words were like seeds, planting themselves in our minds, and the phenomena blossomed around them. Chloe started humming that same tuneless melody. Caspian favored, claiming she didn't know where she'd heard it. Liam, the skeptic, became withdrawn, staring out at the lake for hours, a haunted look in his eyes. I felt a constant low thrum of anxiety, a sense of being watched, not just by Caspian, but by the lake itself. I felt contaminated. The climax arrived on our last night. A storm had blown in, fierce and sudden. We were huddled inside, the power flickering, when we heard a frantic banging at the door. It was Caspian, drenched, his eyes wild. "He's out there!" he gasped, pointing a trembling finger towards the raging lake. "One of yours! He went to the water!" Liam was missing. We rushed out, flashlights cutting through the torrential rain. Caspian led the way, moving with an unnatural agility for a man his age, straight towards the old, crumbling dock where the drownings had supposedly occurred. "They called him," Caspian rasped, rain plastering his thin hair to his skull. He heard them, and then, illuminated by a flash of lightning, we saw it. Figures. Vague, translucent shapes in the churning water at the end of the dock, their forms indistinct but undeniably human, their arms reaching, and Liam, standing at the very edge, swaying as if in a trance. "Liam!" Sarah screamed. Caspian held up a hand. "Don't! You'll break the invitation." His voice was different now, deeper, resonant, as if other voices spoke through him. The air around him was icy, the metallic scent overpowering. He has to join the ranks, Caspian continued, his face illuminated by our wavering beams. It was no longer just the face of an old man. It seemed to shimmer, to superimpose other, younger, waterlogged faces over his own. His eyes, they were the lake, dark and deep and filled with a terrible, patient hunger. The lake needs its due. It always collects. For a horrifying moment, I understood. Caspian wasn't just a messenger. He was a part of it, a conduit, a tender of this submerged horror, perhaps even one of them, somehow tethered to the land. Chloe, bless her sudden courage, grabbed a heavy boat oar and, screaming, charged past Caspian, swinging it wildly at the water's edge near Liam, breaking whatever spell held him. Liam stumbled back, dazed. The figures in the water seemed to recoil, to waver, and then, with a collective sigh that sounded like the lake itself exhaling, they were gone. Caspian just stood there, a look of profound ancient disappointment on his shifting features. Then, as the storm began to abate as quickly as it had arrived, he slowly turned and walked away, not towards the path, but directly into the dark, lapping water, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple. We left before dawn. We never spoke of Caspian or the specific horrors of that night to anyone. How could we? But the lake, and what it represented, what he represented, it lingers. I can't look at a large body of water without feeling a prickle of profound fear. Sometimes, late at night, I hear those muffled whispers, the sound of waterlogged boots dragging on a distant shore. I smell damp earth and rust. Caspian is gone, but the information he carried, the presence he heralded, has infected my reality. The world is no longer solid. It's porous, with dark, cold depths just beneath the surface. Sometimes I see men with his eyes, that murky, knowing gray-green, by canals, by rivers, by the sea. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that they are listening, waiting. And I fear that one day, I'll hear the call too, clearly, and I won't be strong enough to resist the invitation to join the ranks in the cold, silent deep. The horror isn't just out there anymore. It's a seed he planted, and it's taken root. Story 3. The flea market was an annual Memorial Day weekend pilgrimage for us, my wife, Laura, our 7-year-old Leo, and me, David. We weren't serious collectors, just browsers looking for a bit of kitsch or an unexpected treasure. That's how we found the box. Tucked under a table piled high with rusty tools and chipped china, it was an old wooden ammunition case, its stenciled lettering faded. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed newspaper clippings and what looked like dried leaves, was a single tarnished dog tag. PFC J. Marlowe, it read, followed by a string of numbers and T-43 for the tetanus shot. Creepy cool, Leo breathed, his eyes wide. Laura was less enthusiastic, but I felt a strange pull. It was a piece of history, a soldier's forgotten token. For $10, it was ours. We placed it on the mantelpiece, a somber little relic. That's when I first noticed Mr. Finch. He lived a few streets over, a reclusive man I'd only ever seen from a distance, tending his overgrown garden. The day after we brought the dog tag home, he was trimming the hedges bordering our driveway, something he'd never done. New acquisition? He asked, his voice surprisingly soft, a dry rustle like autumn leaves. He gestured with his shears towards our house, though he couldn't possibly have seen the dog tag. Just an old memento, I said, vaguely uneasy. He nodded slowly, his eyes, a pale, cloudy blue like a sky filmed with smoke, lingered on our front door. Some mementos carry more weight than others. They hold echoes. Sometimes the echoes are still shouting. His words were odd, but he smiled, a brief, almost shy quirk of his lips, and I dismissed it as the rambling of an old man. He began to appear more frequently. A quiet figure on his porch when I left for work, a silent presence at the edge of the park when I took Leo to play. His conversations were always brief, always circling back to themes of memory, loss, and things that lingered. "Metal holds a charge, you know," he said one afternoon as I was washing the car. "Especially metal that's seen, strong emotions, fear, pain. It soaks them up like a sponge." He had a peculiar scent about him, faint but distinct, like damp soil and cold iron. His skin, I noticed, was an unhealthy, almost grayish white, and his clothes, though neat, always seemed a size too large, as if he were shrinking within them. The unease began to solidify into something colder when strange things started happening in our house. Cold spots would appear and vanish in the living room, usually near the mantelpiece. Leo started talking about the sad soldier man who sometimes stood in his doorway at night, a man who looked cold and wet. Laura heard whispers, faint and sibilant, when she was alone. I found myself seeking out Mr. Finch, a morbid curiosity warring with a growing dread. He always seemed to know. "The boy sees him, then?" he asked one day before I'd even mentioned Leo. "Children are more open. The veil is thinner for them." He paused, his gaze distant. "He'll be confused, the soldier, lost, looking for his company, or just an end to the noise." "What noise?" I asked, my throat tight. "The last noise," Finch said, his voice dropping. "The one that ripped him out of everything." The information he shared was no longer just unsettling philosophy. It felt like a direct commentary on the increasing strangeness in our home. He spoke of how a violent passing can leave a tear in the fabric of things, and how some souls become snagged, replaying their final moments. He described sensations, a phantom chill, a pressure in the air, the taste of fear, that were becoming frighteningly familiar to me. My own reality began to warp. I'd catch fleeting glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a figure in faded fatigues, gone when I turned. The scent of damp earth and something acrid, like gunpowder, would fill a room for a few seconds and then vanish. One evening, holding the dog tag, I felt a dizzying wave of terror, saw a flash of green tracers against a black sky, heard the roar of explosions and screams. Not a memory, but an experience, raw and visceral, that left me shaking. Mr. Finch seemed to be subtly aware of my decline. "It's drawing on you," he said, his pale eyes fixing on mine with an intensity that was almost predatory. "It needs an anchor to make itself known. You're listening, becoming attuned." He himself looked more gaunt, his skin stretched, tighter over his bones, his eyes sunk deeper, yet they held a disturbing spark of something, understanding or satisfaction. The climax arrived with a suffocating inevitability. Leo woke screaming one night. Laura and I rushed in to find him pointing at the corner of his room, his face pale with terror. "He's angry!" Leo cried. "He's showing me the fire!" And then I saw it. Not with my eyes, not entirely, but a wave of sensation washed over me, emanating from the corner, a psychic shriek of agony and confusion. The room plunged into an icy cold. The smell of burnt fuel and fear was overwhelming. Flashes of orange and red, the deafening crump of mortars, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. J. Marlowe's last moments broadcast into the room, into me. In the midst of this sensory assault, I saw Mr. Finch. Not in the room, but superimposed over my vision, standing beside the spectral, contorted shape of the soldier. He was looking at me, a thin, almost pitying smile on his lips. "He just wants to be understood," Finch's voice echoed in my head, not through my ears. "To pass it on. The weight. You feel it now, don't you? The true shape of his end." His form seemed to shimmer, to become less substantial, more like a projection of the same dread that filled the room. The telling is the taking. I don't know how, but I grabbed the dog tag from my pocket. I'd started carrying it everywhere, a talisman and a curse, and threw it with all my might out Leo's open window, into the night. The presence in the room, the images, the sounds, they didn't vanish, but they receded, like a tide going out, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and an echoing silence. We moved out a week later. We never found the dog tag. I haven't seen Mr. Finch since that night. His house stands empty, the garden truly wild now, but it doesn't matter. The marking, as I now think of it, is complete. He, or the artifact, or whatever unholy, Synergy they represented passed something on to me. The world is no longer what it was. It's layered, filled with invisible wounds and screaming echoes. I see the thin places, the lingering stains of past traumas. Sometimes, I catch the scent of cold iron and damp earth on the wind. And I know something is near. I see people, strangers, with that same haunted knowing look Finch had. And I wonder if they too are conduits, or if they are beginning to hear the whispers from the other side of the veil. I fear I am becoming one of them. The horror isn't just a memory of a haunted house, it's a filter over my eyes, a constant hum beneath the surface of reality. Mr. Finch was merely a harbinger, a signpost, to a deeper, more pervasive wrongness. And he, or it, showed me the way in.